Welcome, traveler. You've found your way to this quiet corner of the night, where stories whisper and shadows stretch. I am the storyteller, and tonight, I'll guide you into a world of mystery and dreams. I know many of you come here to unwind, to let your mind drift as sleep slowly takes over. So before we begin, take a deep breath, and if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep the stories alive. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? I love knowing how far my voice reaches in the silence of the night. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. I never imagined silence could be terrifying until the morning I awoke aboard the paradise of the seas. As a freelance travel photographer, I've been fortunate enough to land a job photographing luxury cruises. My name is Ethan Carter, and I had spent the past 5 days capturing images of sun-soaked decks, gourmet dining rooms, and joyous passengers dancing under starry skies. The trip was supposed to be simple: 1 week at sea, filled with relaxation and spectacular photos to showcase the lavishness of this floating paradise. But on the 5th day, paradise turned into something else entirely. When my eyes opened that morning, it wasn't the bright Caribbean sunlight streaming through the curtains or the faint scent of ocean breeze that startled me. It was the absolute silence. Usually, mornings aboard the ship were marked by gentle vibrations from the engines, distant voices chatting excitedly in hallways, or announcements from the cheerful cruise director. Today, nothing. It felt like waking in a tomb. I sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from my eyes and straining to hear any familiar sounds. But there was only my breathing, unnaturally loud in the stillness. Unease twisted my stomach, and I swung my legs from beneath the covers, stepping onto the cold, carpeted floor. My cabin, a luxury suite I'd been provided as part of my assignment, was as I'd left it the night before. My camera lay safely on the desk, lens cap off, ready to capture another day's adventures. Beside it sat an unfinished cup of coffee, now cold and stale. My travel bag, neatly packed, rested in the corner untouched. Everything appeared normal, except that nothing felt right. Pulling on jeans and a shirt, I called out hesitantly, "Hello," expecting perhaps housekeeping or someone nearby to respond. But my voice echoed back, flat and hollow. Anxiety prickled at my skin as I moved toward the cabin door. I opened it slowly, cautiously peering into the hallway. It was empty. The corridor stretched before me, brightly lit but lifeless. The quiet buzz of the fluorescent lights above felt eerie, unnatural. My heart began beating faster as I stepped into the hallway, leaving the safety of my room behind. Doors to other cabins stood ajar, inviting yet foreboding. I walked to the nearest open door, knocking gently at first. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I said, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the nervousness I was trying to suppress. No answer. I pushed the door open further, and the sight within deepened my dread. The cabin looked like its occupants had simply vanished mid-activity. A breakfast tray with half-eaten scrambled eggs sat abandoned on a table, a fork still resting beside the plate. On the bed lay a book, open and face down, as though someone had planned to return any moment to continue reading. Clothing was scattered loosely across a chair, and even more unsettling, I heard water running from the attached bathroom. I approached cautiously, calling out once more, but again, silence. With trembling fingers, I pushed open the bathroom door and peered inside. Steam fogged the mirror as the shower streamed steadily. The curtain pulled halfway open. Water dripped onto the floor tiles, cooling slowly, yet there was no one in sight. A chill ran down my spine, and I retreated quickly, stumbling back into the hallway, my breath coming quicker. It was as if every passenger and crew member had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving only the echoes of their daily routines behind. I moved further down the hallway, checking more cabins, each discovery amplifying my growing panic. Each room told the same haunting story, a life interrupted abruptly. Laptops left open with unfinished emails, suitcases half-packed, headphones abandoned mid-song. Yet not a single soul remained aboard. Standing alone in the silent corridor, dread tightened its grip around my chest. This vast, floating city, built to carry thousands, now felt claustrophobic, eerie, and abandoned. I had come aboard to document beauty, luxury, and joy. Now I found myself alone, with only silence and unanswered questions. My heart pounding, I made my way toward the central stairway that led to the upper decks, desperate for answers, praying this was somehow a dream, a cruel joke. But the emptiness pressing in around me was too real, too tangible. With each step forward into the unknown, one terrifying thought repeated itself in my mind. Where had everyone gone? My footsteps echoed eerily as I ascended the central stairway toward the upper decks. My heart was racing, fueled by confusion and a deepening sense of dread. The emptiness around me felt oppressive, unnatural. I moved swiftly, desperate to find any signs of life, any answers to explain the sudden disappearance of nearly 4,000 passengers and crew. The first place I checked was the main dining hall. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors, my breath caught in my throat. The scene was utterly surreal. Tables were still neatly set with white linen and shining silverware, and plates loaded with breakfast foods, scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, sat untouched, steam rising gently from them. Coffee cups were filled to the brim, their surfaces perfectly smooth and undisturbed, as if poured moments ago. It was as though everyone had vanished mid-bite, leaving behind only the eerie normality of a breakfast that would never be finished. "Hello," I shouted again, hoping irrationally for an answer. The only response was the faint hum of air conditioning and my own anxious breathing. I moved toward the buffet, my fingers brushing lightly over trays of fruit and pastries, each item fresh and untouched. The unsettling normality of it was chilling. It was as if time itself had frozen in the very instant of everyone's disappearance. With growing urgency, I left the dining hall behind, determined to find someone, anyone. Perhaps there was some emergency announcement I had missed, some logical explanation hidden somewhere on board. My next destination was the pool deck, usually teeming with families, couples sunbathing, and children splashing joyfully in crystal clear water. But stepping onto the sunlit deck, my stomach sank further. It was deserted, the emptiness made all the more haunting by the cheerful surroundings. Towels draped casually over sun loungers, still bearing the imprints of their absent owners. A pair of sunglasses lay casually beside an open magazine, pages fluttering gently in the breeze. I walked slowly past the shimmering, undisturbed surface of the pool. The water was perfectly calm, without even the slightest ripple, reflecting nothing but the empty sky above. It felt unnatural, almost staged. My anxiety escalated as I hurried to the next logical spot, the ship's casino. Even early in the morning, there had always been a few gamblers trying their luck at blackjack or spinning the roulette wheel. But when I entered, the familiar sights of luxury turned deeply unsettling. Tables held half-dealt cards, poker chips neatly stacked and waiting to be claimed. At a roulette wheel, the small silver ball had stopped on red 23, yet nobody stood around it. Slot machines blinked cheerfully, their repetitive jingles quietly echoing in the empty room. It was clear that people had vanished mid-game, their entertainment cut short without warning. My heart now pounding painfully in my chest. I knew there was one place left where I might find answers, the ship's bridge. Surely, the captain and crew would be there, managing this strange crisis. I sprinted toward the stairs, my legs shaky, adrenaline pumping through my veins. When I finally reached the bridge, pushing open the heavy security door, my fears turned to cold, heavy dread. The bridge was entirely empty. Screens displayed navigational charts, radar sweeps continued uninterrupted, and lights blinked calmly across control panels. Yet, not a single crew member was in sight. The captain's chair was turned slightly, as if he'd just stood up a moment ago, planning to return at any second. I approached the control panel, searching for any clues. The navigational systems showed we were exactly on course, drifting slowly forward, engines idling quietly. It was all perfectly normal, except for the absence of anyone controlling it. It was impossible, yet here it was, right before my eyes. Desperate now, I reached for the ship's radio. My trembling fingers grasped the microphone as I clicked the button to send out a distress call. "Hello, this is Ethan Carter, aboard Paradise of the Seas. Mayday, mayday. Is anyone out there? Can anyone hear me?" Static crackled harshly through the speaker, but no response came. My heart sank as I adjusted frequencies, frantically repeating my message. Each time, only the relentless hiss of static replied. I pulled out my cell phone, hoping desperately that my satellite coverage was still active, but my screen showed no signal. My stomach tightened painfully. My phone had never failed to connect before, not even in the most remote oceans. The cold realization began to grip me. I was truly, inexplicably alone. Then, suddenly, the silence was broken by a soft, crackling sound. I spun around, searching wildly for its source. The ship's PA system had sparked to life, but instead of the usual friendly announcements, a faint whisper crept through the speakers, distorted yet clear enough for me to understand. "Ethan, don't forget." My blood ran cold, and my pulse hammered in my ears. I spun frantically, searching every corner of the bridge, heart pounding violently. "Who's there?" I shouted, panic rising in my voice. "Show yourself." But there was nothing, just me, alone, on an unmanned bridge, with only the eerie hum of electronics to keep me company. The whisper repeated once more, softer this time, almost gentle. "Ethan, don't forget." Then the speakers clicked off, plunging me back into a heavy silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. My breathing was ragged, panic overwhelming rational thought. Something terrible had happened here, something beyond comprehension. And somehow, whatever had done this, whatever force had stripped away every living soul from this massive ship, knew my name. My chest tightened painfully, and the echo of that whispered voice still haunted me as I fled from the bridge, desperate for safety, desperate for anything resembling normalcy. But the corridors I ran through now felt alien, twisting into an endless maze of polished metal and reflective surfaces, amplifying my isolation with each frantic step. Somewhere amid the confusion, I stumbled into the grand ballroom. I paused briefly at the threshold, catching my breath and scanning the luxurious, empty space before me. The room stretched out impressively, filled with glittering chandeliers, polished wooden dance floors, and ornate, golden details along the walls. Most strikingly, the ballroom was lined entirely by enormous mirrored panels, designed to amplify the splendor and grandeur of shipboard galas. But now, these mirrors reflected only the emptiness of the room and my own pale, terrified expression. Yet something in the mirrors caught my eye, a fleeting movement just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, heart thudding painfully against my ribs, but saw only empty space behind me. Unease rose sharply in my chest, and I cautiously stepped closer, my eyes locked firmly on the reflective surface. My reflection approached, matching my movements exactly. But beyond that familiar image, beyond myself, I saw something impossible. My breath caught in my throat as disbelief gripped me, freezing me in place. The mirrored ballroom behind my reflection was alive with activity. It was full of passengers dressed in elegant evening attire, mingling, drinking champagne, laughing warmly, and moving gently to music I couldn't hear. It was as though the grand ball scheduled for tonight was taking place right now, just inches away, but only within the glass. I spun around again, desperate to confirm what my mind refused to accept. Yet behind me, the ballroom remained stubbornly empty, silent, lifeless. Facing the mirror again, I drew closer, my breath fogging the glass as I examined the impossible scene unfolding behind my reflection. People chatted animatedly in clusters, couples danced across the polished wooden floors, waiters gracefully navigated between groups, trays balanced expertly in hand. I moved even closer, transfixed, eyes wide in disbelief. As I stared, a woman in a shimmering blue gown suddenly turned toward me, a polite smile still lingering on her lips. Her eyes locked onto mine, recognition dawning across her features. Her expression darkened subtly as she mouthed something urgently, her words silent behind the glass. I shook my head desperately, stepping closer, straining to understand her muted message. What? What are you saying? I whispered helplessly. In that instant, every figure in the mirror suddenly stopped moving, freezing simultaneously. The laughter ceased. The dancers halted mid-step. A terrible, icy dread surged through me as, one by one, each person in that ghostly ballroom turned slowly, deliberately, toward me. Hundreds of faces stared, their eyes wide, accusing, fearful, all directed at me. Only me. I stumbled back, heart racing, pulse pounding in my ears. My reflection stood alone now, small and helpless, surrounded by a crowd that should not exist, trapped in an impossible nightmare of glass and shadow. Panic seized me, and I turned, fleeing blindly from the ballroom, sprinting desperately through corridors and down stairways, barely aware of my direction. At last, I reached the sanctuary of my cabin, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it frantically. My breathing came in ragged, terrified gasps. I pressed my back against the door, eyes shut tightly, trying to steady myself and regain some shred of control. My pulse hammered relentlessly, matching the sickening rhythm of panic that enveloped me. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Gradually, I steadied myself, rationalizing that perhaps stress, isolation, or fatigue had conjured the vision in the ballroom. But even as I clung desperately to this reasoning, something shattered my attempt to calm myself. Footsteps. They came softly at first, cautious, echoing just beyond my cabin door. My blood froze instantly. I held my breath, listening intently, certain my racing heartbeat must be audible through the thin barrier. "Who is it?" I called out shakily, desperately hoping for a rational reply. No answer, only silence, thick and oppressive. Then the footsteps returned, louder now, closer, deliberate, slowly pacing the hallway just outside my door. Fear tightened my chest as I inched toward the peephole, pressing my eye tightly against the glass, praying to see a crew member, passenger, any human presence. But the hallway was empty, brightly lit, yet completely devoid of life. Confusion and terror mixed nauseatingly within me as I stepped back, hands trembling, desperate to understand what was happening. And then, without warning, the handle of my door rattled violently, shaking under sudden force. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice high with fear, backing away from the door. The rattling ceased abruptly, plunging the room into thick, nerve-wracking silence once again. I stood frozen, heart thundering in my chest, ears straining desperately for any sound, any indication of what lay beyond the flimsy security of my locked door. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. Just when I began to believe the danger had passed, the footsteps returned, pacing again slowly, deliberately, right outside. A familiar whisper crackled faintly from the speaker overhead, sending ice-cold terror down my spine. "Ethan, don't forget." My heart felt ready to burst from my chest. Something unimaginable was happening aboard the paradise of the seas, something beyond logic, beyond sanity. And whatever it was, it had its gaze fixed firmly on me. I stood frozen in the center of my cabin, heart pounding uncontrollably, the whisper still echoing through my mind. My breathing came in shallow, uneven gasps. I knew I had to get a grip, to find some shred of proof, some tangible evidence to ground me back in reality. With shaking hands, I reached for my camera, the one thing that had always brought me comfort and clarity. I hoped desperately that its familiar weight in my hands would restore some sanity to the nightmare unfolding around me. Taking a deep breath, I powered it on, the small screen lighting softly. I quickly navigated through the photo gallery, scrolling back through images I'd captured during the first few carefree days on board. At first, everything appeared normal. Photos of sunny decks, passengers laughing, sunsets painting the ocean in rich hues of gold and pink. But then my finger paused over an image I couldn't recall taking. The photograph showed passengers gathered at an elegant dinner, an event I had no memory of attending. My heart sank as dread surged back, icy and sharp. I scrolled further, confusion giving way to cold horror. Dozens of photos appeared, beautiful, vibrant, full of people and activity I never remembered seeing or capturing. Worse yet, each photograph contained one face that was strangely blurred or entirely missing, erased as though forcibly removed from reality itself. My pulse quickened painfully as I scrolled faster, desperate to understand what was happening. Then, almost instinctively, I flipped back to the very first photo I'd taken, one of myself, smiling happily on deck, camera in hand, excited for the journey ahead. I felt my stomach twist sickeningly. My own face was faded, translucent, barely recognizable. It was as though I were slowly being erased from existence, blending away into nothingness. Panic gripped my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. Something horrifyingly unnatural was occurring aboard this ship, and it was beginning to erase me as it had already erased everyone else. No, 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 I murmured weakly, my voice shaking. Desperation seized me, driving me from the cabin once again. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Every large cruise liner kept meticulous records, ship manifests, archives of past voyages. I remembered passing the archive room on an earlier tour of the ship, and now it was my last desperate hope for clarity. I raced through empty corridors, footsteps echoing sharply, punctuating the heavy silence. When I finally reached the ship's archives, a small room tucked away in an isolated corridor, I threw open the door and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights flickered as if protesting my presence, casting eerie shadows onto neatly organized shelves filled with books, binders, and logbooks. I frantically searched the shelves, pulling out logbooks, journals, passenger manifests, my shaking hands leafing through decades of voyages captured on pages now yellowed with age. As I flipped through logs of previous journeys, my eyes settled on one particular ledger dated decades earlier. The date struck me as familiar, though I couldn't place exactly why, until I opened it to find a record of the Paradise of the Sea's maiden voyage in careful, elegant handwriting. I scanned down the page and felt my blood run cold. Passenger names were neatly recorded, yet each one had a line drawn through it, methodically crossing them out. My hands trembled as I flipped further. Page after page, year after year, countless names, hundreds of passengers, each one crossed out with precision. The ledger appeared endless, a horrifyingly meticulous record of disappearances long forgotten. Then suddenly, impossibly, the page before me began to shift and move, as if touched by an unseen hand. Ink appeared slowly, forming letters that spelled out a single name, my own. Ethan Carter. No, I whispered, voice cracking with terror. The letters darkened, drying into permanence before my eyes. Then beneath my name, a single word appeared in elegant script. Missing. Before I could process the horror of this sight, a whisper, soft and chillingly familiar, filled the space just behind me. You're part of us now, it said, quiet yet unmistakably clear. I spun around, nearly dropping the ledger as my hands shook violently. A figure stood in the dim shadows near the door, the pale glow of corridor lights behind it obscuring the details of its face. Its form was vague yet undeniably human, tall, slender, waiting patiently. My heart raced with fear and dread as I struggled to form words. Who are you? I choked out, voice shaking uncontrollably. What's going on here? The figure took a slow step forward, just enough for the faintest hint of features to become visible, eyes dark and hollow, skin pale as moonlight. It looked almost normal, yet there was something terribly wrong, something faded, incomplete, like the faces in the photographs. We were forgotten, the figure whispered, its voice filled with an aching sadness. Everyone aboard this ship, forgotten by the world, forgotten by time. Until today, we were nothing but echoes. Now you join us, Ethan. No, I whispered, backing away slowly, dread clawing painfully in my throat. I don't belong here. This isn't real. It's real, the figure murmured, stepping slightly closer. Every voyage, one soul remains behind. One person left to witness our fate, then join it. My mind raced, desperately piecing fragments together. Passengers vanished, erased from memory, fading from photographs. All those faces blurred or missing. I realized suddenly they were the forgotten ones, victims trapped aboard the paradise of the seas. "You can't escape," the figure murmured softly, almost sympathetically. "No one ever does." I backed away slowly, panic swelling within me, gripping my chest like a vice. My eyes darted toward the doorway, looking for an escape, any way to outrun this fate. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice shaking, trying desperately to stall for time. "What happened here?" The figure stepped closer, now clearer, a sad smile on its faintly illuminated face. "We're the forgotten," it repeated softly, almost mournfully. "We've been here, unseen, unheard, waiting, and now you're here with us. Don't you remember, Ethan? Don't you feel it already?" I shook my head defiantly, but deep within, a terrifying truth resonated. Already, the memories of who I was felt dimmer, fading like ink beneath water. Already, a part of me felt distant, slipping away. The figure took another slow step forward, reaching out one pale, ghostly hand. "Soon, Ethan," it whispered gently, almost comfortingly. "Very soon, you'll understand." My heart thundered painfully as I realized with sickening certainty that I was now part of this ship's forgotten story, bound to its silent halls, destined to disappear slowly, silently. Just another blurred face on a photograph, another crossed-out name in a ledger no one would ever see again. Trapped, helpless, and utterly alone, I knew there was no escape. The paradise of the seas had claimed me, and soon, like so many before, I, too, would vanish into the forgotten silence. The figure stepped fully from the shadows, revealing himself clearly for the first time. My breathing quickened as the pale fluorescent lights overhead illuminated his frail form, a thin, elderly man with skin almost translucent from years without sunlight. Deep wrinkles traced the sadness of countless forgotten days across his face, and his eyes, hollow and sunken, stared at me with an expression of profound weariness. He wore an elegant but faded tuxedo, the kind reserved for formal evenings, now frayed at the edges from decades of wear. Who are you?" My voice trembled, betraying the fear I tried so hard to conceal. The old man smiled faintly, a sorrowful twist of his thin lips. "My name was Henry," he said softly, his voice dry like leaves rustling in autumn wind. "I was once a passenger aboard the paradise of the seas, just like you." "What happened here?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where is everyone?" "They're still here," he answered quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. "They never truly left. No one leaves the paradise. Not really." He stepped forward, closing the distance slowly, deliberately, until the shadows receded fully from his weathered face. Under the weak glow of the archive room, his features grew clearer, revealing eyes filled with grief and memory. "This ship," he continued softly, gesturing at the walls around us, "it doesn't simply take lives. It takes existence itself. Those who disappear aboard the paradise of the seas become part of the ship. Invisible, intangible, but ever-present. Trapped between worlds, unseen yet always here." My pulse quickened again, my mind racing to comprehend his words. The blurred faces, the forgotten photographs. Suddenly, everything began to make horrific sense. People erased from the memory of friends, family, and history itself. But why? I pleaded, desperate for understanding. "Why does it do this?" He stepped closer, his expression grim. "It is a ritual," Henry explained softly, his tone gentle yet resigned. "A cycle of sacrifice that began when the ship first sailed years ago. The paradise was supposed to be the greatest luxury liner ever built, but something went terribly wrong on its maiden voyage." "What went wrong?" I urged, breathless, dreading yet needing his answer. He paused, his tired eyes gazing past me, lost in a painful memory. "People started vanishing." He began slowly, almost painfully. "At first, just a few. A passenger here, a crew member there. At first, the disappearances were blamed on accidents, overboard incidents, tragic mistakes at sea. But soon, Everyone realized something else was at work. I swallowed hard, picturing terrified passengers realizing their fate. The ship had become alive, aware somehow, he continued, glancing nervously around the room. Its builders had unknowingly awakened something ancient, something hungry. It took people, absorbed them, consumed their memories and their identities, making it as if they'd never existed at all. My stomach twisted in fear and sorrow. And you? His gaze turned deeply sorrowful. I was one of the first, left behind, alone, to watch the others disappear, just like you now. Forgotten by the world outside, my family erased, as though I'd never existed at all. I watched helplessly as my name faded from every photograph, every record. I've waited here ever since. Why? I asked, voice shaking. Why haven't you disappeared like the others? Because the ship always leaves one, he whispered bitterly. A witness. Someone to remember, to understand, to feel the anguish of the lost until the next voyage comes. Then the cycle repeats. Now, you've seen them, Ethan. And once you see them, they see you too. A chill ran down my spine, recalling the hundreds of faces staring at me from the ballroom mirrors. So all those people I saw, they're trapped, repeating the moments before they vanished, forever. But once you've truly seen them, once you notice, you're connected, they'll seek you out, making you one of them. I stumbled back, shaken, unwilling to accept what he was saying. No, I muttered, shaking my head defiantly. There must be some way out, some way to stop this. He smiled sadly. I thought so too once. But there is no escape. The ship won't dock again, Ethan. It never has, and it never will. Instead, every few years, it resets itself. Memories are wiped clean. Families forget, friends move on, and another group boards paradise, oblivious to the horror awaiting them. I felt tears sting my eyes, frustration and fear boiling over. Why me? I demanded, fists clenched in helpless rage. Why was I chosen? Because you noticed, he replied quietly, his voice heavy with sorrow. The ship chooses its witness carefully. Always someone observant, someone sensitive enough to see through the illusion. You're a photographer, you capture memories. Now the ship has captured yours. His words pierced me like blades. My photographs had become a prison, a cruel tool for erasure. I was becoming less real with each passing moment. Is there no hope? I whispered, barely able to form the words. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. It felt cold, nearly weightless. No hope, he said quietly, his voice filled with sorrowful finality. Only understanding. You'll fade slowly, day by day, until nothing remains but echoes of what you once were. You'll join us, just another forgotten passenger aboard this cursed ship. Behind him, in the shadows, movement stirred. Figures appeared silently, faces pale, familiar yet distorted. Passengers, crew, people trapped forever. Their expressions ranged from sorrow to resignation, gazing at me with empty eyes. Among them stood the woman from the ballroom mirror, still dressed in shimmering blue, her gaze mournful. I felt myself weaken, memories growing hazy, slipping from my grasp like sand through trembling fingers. The sensation terrified me more than death itself. Don't fight it, Richard whispered gently, almost kindly. It's easier when you accept. Soon, no one will remember you, not even yourself. I sank to the cold floor, tears streaming silently down my face. Desperation surged through me as I clung to fading memories, my home, my work, my family. I fought desperately to hold on to myself, yet felt my identity slip steadily away, evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Richard knelt beside me, his expression compassionate, understanding, tragic. You'll fade, he repeated softly, voice soothing despite the horror of his words. But you won't disappear entirely. None of us do. We're all here, unseen, unheard, passengers forever aboard paradise of the seas. He stood slowly, stepping back to join the gathering ghosts around us. Welcome aboard, Ethan, he whispered sadly. You're one of us now. And as darkness closed around me, memories fading, identity dissolving, I finally understood the true horror of the paradise of the seas. Not death, but eternal oblivion. Forgotten, erased, and forever lost at sea. My mind surged with adrenaline as reality snapped sharply back into place. No, I couldn't let this ship claim me. Despite Richard's tragic acceptance, a desperate voice deep within screamed for survival. I couldn't accept oblivion. I couldn't simply fade away, erased and forgotten. Without a word, I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the gathering crowd of pale figures closing in around me, their empty, pleading eyes following my every movement. Richard watched silently, resigned but making no attempt to stop me as I bolted from the archives, sprinting through the darkened corridors. I knew I had limited time. My memories were slipping rapidly now, fragments drifting just out of reach. My mother's smile, my childhood home, faces I loved. They were fading, blurred, dissolving like a photograph left too long in sunlight. My one hope was the lifeboats. Every cruise liner had them, safety measures designed for emergencies precisely like this. If I could reach one and escape the cursed paradise, perhaps this terrible spell would be broken. Racing up metal staircases, through narrow hallways, and onto the open deck, I found the lifeboats, neatly lined up along the side rails. But relief quickly turned to dread when I realized the truth. They were chained firmly in place, secured tightly as if something, had anticipated exactly this moment. No, I shouted desperately, rattling the heavy chains, pulling uselessly until my hands were scraped raw. The chains refused to budge, cold and unyielding. Panic threatened to overwhelm me once more. Then came the whispers, soft at first, growing steadily louder. They hissed my name, rising like a chorus of ghosts on the wind. Ethan, Ethan, join us, Ethan. I spun around frantically, heart thundering painfully, eyes wide. Emerging from the shadows, the passengers from the ballroom appeared one by one. Once vibrant and joyful, now pale, hollow-eyed, silent as death. Their mouths opened and closed slowly in unison, mouthing words I couldn't understand, yet felt in the depths of my soul. Stop, I shouted, backing away helplessly, bumping into the railing as more figures crowded around. My breathing became shallow, terror gripping me, paralyzing my limbs. I was surrounded, trapped. I could feel the cold embrace of the ship reaching for me, pulling at the edges of my consciousness, eroding who I was. You cannot flee, Ethan. Richard's calm voice cut through the whispers, and I turned sharply, finding him standing apart, watching me with sorrowful eyes. This ship will not release you. There's only one path left to you. What path? I demanded, my voice trembling, raw with desperation. Tell me. The ledger, Richard said gravely, stepping forward slowly through the gathering crowd. The ledger is the heart of this curse. It's the ship's memory, a record of every soul trapped here. Destroying it breaks the cycle. Hope surged within me, tempered immediately by his grave expression. But what happens to us? His eyes darkened sadly. The ledger is our anchor to this world. Destroy it, and you erase our existence forever. No one will remember you, me, or anyone else who ever boarded paradise. Our souls, our names, our memories, all vanish completely. My pulse quickened painfully. Oblivion was precisely what terrified me most. And if I don't, I asked, already knowing his answer. You become another forgotten soul, like all of us, he said softly, gesturing to the pale figures around us. Forever trapped in a loop, fading slowly but never entirely disappearing. An eternity of silent torment aboard this ship. A horrible choice lay before me. Erase myself completely or remain forever trapped, lost between existence and oblivion. My mind raced desperately. Was non-existence better than endless agony? The thought terrified me, but there was no other option. I had to stop this cycle. No more souls deserve this fate. I'll do it, I whispered, voice cracking painfully. I'll destroy it. Richard nodded solemnly, understanding fully the gravity of my choice. Then hurry. It must be done quickly. You're fading faster than you realize. I pushed past the ghostly passengers, who parted slowly, silently, their hollow eyes following me, their mouths still moving soundlessly, speaking words of warning or perhaps sorrowful farewell. The whispers continued, a haunting chorus pressing against my consciousness, desperate yet strangely resigned. As I reached the archive room once more, my limbs felt sluggish, reality becoming faint, slipping from my grasp. I knew now what had to be done. The ledger lay open, waiting, mocking me, my name glaring up in ink freshly dried. I seized the heavy book, my trembling hands gripping it tightly, feeling its weight, the weight of all those lost souls contained within. My vision blurred with tears of grief and fear as I lifted it toward a small metal wastebasket. Beside it lay a lighter, placed almost expectantly, as though this moment had been planned from the very start. The whispers rose to a feverish pitch as I flicked the lighter, the tiny flame flickering in the cold air. I paused, breath catching painfully in my throat, realizing this was my last act, my final moment in existence. "Forgive me," I whispered, thinking of every soul aboard this ship, every name crossed out, every face blurred. "You deserve peace." I touched the flame to the pages. They ignited instantly, fire racing hungrily through the ink-stained paper, flames leaping upward. The whispers grew suddenly louder, deafening, pleading, then abruptly silenced. As flames consumed the ledger, an odd calmness overtook me, a sense of peace washing through my fading mind. Faces appeared briefly in the flickering firelight. Richard, the woman in blue, countless forgotten passengers, smiling softly, gratefully, as their forms dissolved gently into shadow. The last thing I felt was my own memory slipping gently away, my name, my life, my existence, disappearing gracefully, softly erased as though never real. Yet, somehow, in that final instant of nothingness, I knew I had succeeded. The cycle was broken. The paradise of the seas, with all its forgotten souls, finally surrendered us to oblivion. And as darkness took me, I embraced it willingly, my final sacrifice to ensure that no one else would ever again be lost at sea. With every ounce of strength I had left, I clutched the ledger tightly to my chest and staggered toward the ship's lower decks, driven by grim determination. My mind was fading fast, names, memories, faces melting into nothingness, but I held tightly to one thought. This had to end now. I reached the engine room, oppressive heat radiating from the massive furnaces that powered the paradise of the seas. Flames roared fiercely behind steel doors, casting flickering shadows across rusted walls. Without hesitation, I approached the fiery mouth of the furnace, lifting the cursed ledger high above my head. "Let it end," I whispered hoarsely, voice barely audible above the crackling flames. With one last surge of strength, I hurled the ledger into the fire, watching as it vanished instantly into the blaze, pages curling, ink dissolving into ash. Immediately, the ship shuddered violently beneath my feet. The lights flickered, and an unearthly groan echoed through the walls, resonating from deep within the vessel. It was a sound of pain, relief, and release all at once. The ghosts around me screamed silently, their pale forms dissolving like smoke into the air. Richard appeared beside me one final time, his weary face finally peaceful. "Thank you, Ethan," he whispered gently, his form fading slowly. "You freed us all." The floor trembled harder, and cracks formed in the steel around me. Bolts popped loose, and steam burst violently from pipes. I staggered backward, struggling to remain standing as the world dissolved around me. Slowly, the shadowy figures vanished one by one, expressions peaceful, grateful. My own vision blurred, fading like an old photograph left out in the sun. I felt myself weakening, my consciousness unraveling like threads slipping from a worn fabric. I smiled faintly, feeling no fear, only relief, knowing my choice had saved countless souls from an eternal nightmare. As darkness closed in, the ship faded from reality, slipping gently away beneath my feet, as though it had never existed at all. Years later, on another luxury liner somewhere across calm blue seas, a young photographer boarded the ship, eager to document the voyage. As he explored the deck, adjusting lenses and preparing for the assignment, a crew member approached him, smiling warmly. "You look like you could use this," the crewman said, handing him an antique camera, one clearly decades old, polished but worn from time. It belonged to someone long ago. Perhaps it could be useful to you. The photographer accepted it gratefully, intrigued by the unexpected gift. He flipped carefully through the old digital gallery, amused by the dated images of luxurious dinners, elegant ballrooms, and carefree passengers. But suddenly, he stopped, heart quickening at the sight of one strangely haunting photograph. It showed a blurred figure, almost faded away, standing alone against a ship's railing. The man's face was indistinct, yet somehow conveyed profound sadness, loneliness, and quiet acceptance. Beneath the worn image, almost invisible at the edges, a faint name was etched into the camera's casing, barely readable. Ethan Carter. The photographer stared curiously, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Who was this?" he asked softly, turning to the crew member, who merely shrugged. "Who knows?" the crewman replied casually. "Probably someone long forgotten." As the young photographer studied the ghostly figure, the distant whisper of ocean waves seemed to murmur a quiet, forgotten name. Just another soul forever lost at sea. My name is Daniel Reeves, and I've always been good at noticing details. Maybe it comes from my years as a police officer back in Florida, spending long shifts observing scenes, searching for clues others overlooked. But after the stress of chasing criminals and witnessing the worst humanity had to offer, I decided it was time for a quieter life. That's how I ended up here, working as a security officer aboard the luxury cruise liner Paradise of the Seas. It sounded like a perfect job at first: sunshine, endless ocean, and happy travelers enjoying their vacations. Little did I know what awaited me on this floating city of dreams. The Paradise of the Seas was enormous, a white, gleaming marvel capable of carrying over 4,000 passengers and nearly 1,500 crew members. This week, we were cruising the Caribbean, a 7-day voyage from Miami to the Bahamas, St. Thomas, and back again. I'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of life aboard, walking the brightly lit corridors late at night, checking that all the doors were locked, ensuring guests felt safe, and making sure everyone stayed calm and happy. Most nights were uneventful, just the quiet hum of the engines and the distant laughter of passengers enjoying drinks or shows on the decks above. But lately, I'd begun to feel something unusual. Nothing I could put my finger on exactly, just the sense that something wasn't quite right. Like the quiet was too deep, or the shadows a little darker than usual. It was close to midnight when I began my patrol that evening. My black uniform felt stiff against my shoulders as I made my rounds, a radio crackling softly at my hip, keys jangling with each step. The main lobby, usually bustling during the day, was empty and softly lit, its marble floors reflecting dim lights overhead. The silence made the ship feel strangely abandoned, despite thousands sleeping peacefully behind closed cabin doors. I turned the corner and walked toward the reception desk, expecting to find Amelia Carter, as I always did, quietly waiting behind the polished marble counter. Amelia had become a comforting presence during these long nights. She was young, maybe 26 or 27. With chestnut hair, she kept tied neatly back and warm brown eyes that welcomed every guest with sincerity. Even at this late hour, she always managed a bright smile whenever she saw me. Tonight, however, Amelia seemed different. She was standing, not sitting, her gaze fixed thoughtfully on something beyond the empty lobby. As I approached, she startled slightly, turning to face me with relief on her face. "Daniel, you scared me," she laughed nervously, putting her hand to her chest. "I didn't hear you coming." "Sorry," I chuckled gently. "Everything okay? You seem distracted." Amelia paused a moment, hesitating as if weighing whether she should speak. Then, softly, almost shyly, she leaned in slightly across the counter, her voice lowered as if sharing a secret. "Do you ever feel like this ship is watching us?" I raised an eyebrow, trying to mask the slight chill her words gave me. Amelia wasn't prone to dramatics or superstition. She'd always struck me as level-headed, practical, dependable. Watching us, I replied lightly, forcing a reassuring smile. You mean like security cameras? No. She shook her head, clearly uneasy. Not cameras. I mean, it's silly, but like the ship itself. The corridors, the cabins, even the walls, it's like they're aware of us. Listening, observing. For a moment, silence filled the space between us, thickening with an uncomfortable tension. The hairs on my arms rose slightly, though I quickly dismissed it as nonsense. Perhaps she'd been reading too many scary stories, or maybe exhaustion from the late shift was catching up with her. Still, I sensed genuine discomfort in her voice. I think the night shifts might be getting to you. I joked gently, trying to ease her anxiety. Maybe you should switch to daytime hours for a bit. Amelia offered a weak smile, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Maybe you're right, she sighed, but her voice was still laced with an undercurrent of worry. But lately, there's just something strange here at night. Sometimes I swear I hear whispers coming from empty hallways, doors closing when no one else is around. You haven't noticed anything like that? I paused, considering her words carefully. The truth was, there had been times, fleeting moments during patrol, when I'd felt unusually alone, as if someone or something else lingered just out of sight. I'd chalked it up to imagination, but Amelia's unease stirred a shadow of doubt in me. Just your mind playing tricks, I said finally, trying to convince myself as much as her. You know how quiet it gets around here after midnight. Maybe, Amelia replied softly. She glanced briefly down the empty corridor, then back to me, her expression resigned, but still uneasy. But promise you'll keep an eye out tonight? Just in case. Of course, I nodded reassuringly. That's my job, remember? She smiled again, more genuine this time, visibly relaxing. Thanks, Daniel. I stepped away from the reception, continuing my patrol. But as I moved deeper into the maze-like passageways of the ship, Amelia's words echoed in my mind. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, noticing each faint creak and whisper in the dark corridors around me. And for the first time since I'd begun working on the Paradise of the Seas, I wondered if there might be truth in her fears, that maybe, somewhere within these endless hallways and closed cabin doors, something unknown was watching us after all. The next morning, the unsettling conversation with Amelia still lingered in my thoughts, though daylight made those shadows feel distant and imaginary. It was easier to dismiss strange feelings in the bright Caribbean sunshine. After a quick breakfast, I began my daily routine, starting with the usual rounds through the ship's main corridors and public areas. When I passed by the reception desk, however, my routine was immediately disrupted. Amelia wasn't there. That wasn't unusual by itself, of course. People took breaks all the time, but I'd grown accustomed to seeing her smile every morning. Instead, behind the desk was Claire, Amelia's shift partner, typing diligently at the computer. Claire had short blonde hair and glasses, and she rarely looked up from her tasks. I leaned casually against the counter, nodding a polite greeting. Morning, Claire. Amelia taking a break already. Claire's fingers stopped mid-type. She glanced up at me with an expression of mild confusion, her eyebrows furrowed. Amelia, she repeated slowly. Who's that? I laughed awkwardly, assuming she was joking. Funny. Amelia Carter, your shift partner? Brunette, friendly smile, always works the night shift. Claire stared at me blankly, her eyes searching mine as if trying to understand some complicated joke. Daniel, I'm sorry, but I honestly have no idea who you're talking about. My shift partner's always been Miguel. My smile faded slowly, replaced by a growing unease. No, Claire. Amelia's been working nights here for months. You two always switch shifts at 6. Claire shook her head, confusion turning to concern. Daniel, are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see medical. I'm telling you, I don't know any Amelia. A cold chill crept up my spine, but I forced myself to remain calm. Maybe it was Claire who was confused. After all, working long hours on this ship could muddle anyone's memory. I quickly excused myself and headed directly for the administration office to check the staff registry. My heart pounded faster with each step, anxiety building. When I reached the office, I quietly asked the staff manager if I could quickly glance over the crew roster. He shrugged and handed me the tablet, indifferent to my urgency. I scanned through every name carefully, twice, then 3 times. Amelia Carter wasn't listed anywhere. It was as if she'd never existed. My pulse quickened further, and dread tightened in my chest. There had to be a mistake. Determined, I hurried to the crew quarters, knocking urgently at cabin doors, asking anyone I could find about Amelia. But every person I questioned reacted with the same puzzled expression, politely shaking their heads and apologizing for not knowing her. Even the housekeeping crew, who knew everyone on the ship, insisted there had never been anyone named Amelia assigned to the reception. Desperate, I finally decided to check Amelia's cabin myself. I clearly remembered her room number, Deck 2, Cabin 214. I rushed down the narrow corridor, heart pounding in rhythm with my frantic footsteps. But when I reached Cabin 214, I found the door open, the room immaculate and completely unoccupied. The bed was neatly made, untouched, as if no one had ever set foot inside. No belongings, no clothing, nothing at all. Panic surged in my chest. What the hell was going on? I needed something concrete. If no one remembered Amelia, maybe I could find proof through the ship's security footage. The CCTV room was cramped, lined with dozens of monitors showing various sections of the ship. The operator, a young guy named Vince, looked bored as usual, sipping coffee while scrolling lazily through camera feeds. "Hey, Vince, can you do me a favor? Pull up footage of the main lobby from last night, around midnight." He nodded, quickly tapping keys and rewinding the footage. I stared intently at the monitor, certain Amelia would appear, her familiar face greeting me as always. But she didn't. The footage showed me, alone, talking to empty space at the reception desk. There was no Amelia, only me, gesturing, nodding, smiling, as if speaking to thin air. My blood turned to ice. Vince glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Who were you talking to, man? Nobody's there." I muttered something vague and stumbled away, heart racing, my mind spinning with disbelief. Was I losing my sanity? Had Amelia truly been nothing more than my imagination, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Shaken, I returned to my cabin, locking the door behind me, desperate to collect my thoughts. Hours passed slowly. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Amelia, doubting myself, yet knowing she had to have been real. She had to have existed. Finally, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and I drifted off into uneasy sleep. A soft knocking sound pulled me abruptly from my dreams. I jolted awake, instantly alert, listening intently. Had I imagined it? No. Another knock came, soft but clear, from just outside my cabin door. Heart hammering, I quickly rose, grabbing my robe and approaching cautiously. I swung the door open sharply, prepared to confront whoever, or whatever, was playing this twisted game. But the hallway was empty. I took a step forward, my foot hitting something soft on the carpeted floor. Glancing down, I saw a single, crumpled piece of paper lying there, faintly illuminated by the dim hallway lights. I picked it up, unfolding the note carefully, feeling my breath catch as I read the shaky, desperate handwriting scrawled across the page. "Please, don't forget me." My chest tightened painfully, a wave of dread washing over me. It was her handwriting, Amelia's handwriting. She was real, she had existed, and now something sinister had erased every trace of her, except for this desperate plea. But why? And how? As I stood alone in the empty hallway, staring at Amelia's frantic message, I felt with chilling certainty that I was being watched from somewhere deep inside the ship, just as Amelia had feared. Something hidden, something dangerous and unknown was aware of me, aware that I remembered what everyone else had forgotten. And now, it knew exactly where to find me. Sleep was impossible after finding Amelia's note. I spent the rest of the night pacing anxiously inside my cabin, wrestling with what I'd seen and the chilling realization that Amelia hadn't just vanished. She had somehow been erased, deliberately removed from existence aboard this ship. Morning came slowly, bringing no relief from the gnawing unease growing inside me. I had to know more. I needed answers. If Amelia was real, and that note proved she was, then someone or something had made her disappear. My instincts from years as a police officer resurfaced, driving me forward. There was only one place aboard this ship where I might find answers: the captain's private archive, a restricted room containing historical logs, crew manifests, and confidential incident reports. Accessing it wouldn't be easy, but my desperation overrode any caution. That evening, I waited until the captain left his quarters for dinner. The corridors were quieter now, passengers busy enjoying their meals and entertainment. My heart raced as I quietly approached the archive door. Using my master security key, I opened the door and quickly slipped inside, shutting it softly behind me. The archive was dimly lit, shelves stacked floor to ceiling with dusty folders and old logs, organized meticulously by year. Taking a deep breath, I began my search, moving quickly yet carefully through dozens of files, checking names, dates, and incident reports. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour before my hand touched a particularly thick folder labeled Crew Incidents, 2005. My gut twisted in anticipation. I carefully opened the folder, flipping through pages yellowed with age. Then, suddenly, I saw it. A faded crew manifest listing personnel from exactly 20 years ago. My breath stopped as my eyes scanned down the list. Amelia Carter, receptionist. Status: lost at sea. No remains found. Beside her name was a handwritten note in faded blue ink, clearly scrawled in a rush. Lost at sea during voyage to St. Thomas. Disappearance unexplained. No investigation conducted, per captain's orders. My fingers trembled, dread pooling in my stomach. Amelia had vanished before, 2 decades earlier. She had been lost at sea. No body, no evidence, no investigation. How could she possibly have been working here alongside me just days ago? I tucked the manifest carefully back in place, knowing I'd uncovered something deeply unsettling. Someone had hidden Amelia's disappearance deliberately, silenced her story, erasing her from the world as if she'd never existed. But why had she returned, and why had I been the only one able to remember her? Later that night, haunted by what I'd found, I resumed my patrol, desperate for a sense of normalcy. The bright lights of the entertainment areas felt surreal now, passengers blissfully unaware of the darkness hidden aboard their paradise. As I walked through the ship's main lounge, a soft voice broke my thoughts. "You look troubled, young man." I turned sharply, startled. An elderly gentleman sat quietly at a corner table, nursing a cup of tea. He appeared harmless enough, frail, dressed neatly in a sweater vest, silver hair combed carefully to the side. I'd seen him before. His name was Richard Holloway, a frequent guest known for being quiet and polite. "Long night," I replied dismissively, hoping to avoid conversation. But Richard's gaze lingered, penetrating and knowing. "You've seen something," he continued softly. I steady. "Something you shouldn't have." I hesitated, the urge to deny it strong, but Richard's knowing stare made resistance futile. I took a cautious seat across from him, lowering my voice. Do you know something about this ship? About someone named Amelia Carter?" Richard stiffened visibly, his eyes widening momentarily. His hands tightened around his cup. "You saw her, didn't you?" he whispered, voice thick with a fearful urgency. "That means she chose you." "What do you mean, chose me?" I demanded quietly, anxiety rising. "Who is she? How can no one else remember her?" Richard glanced nervously around, ensuring no one overheard us. Leaning closer, his voice became a barely audible whisper. "I've traveled aboard this ship many times, probably too many. You stay long enough, you hear things, see things others won't. Amelia Carter isn't the first person to disappear aboard Paradise of the Seas. Every few years, someone simply vanishes without explanation. Crew, passengers, it doesn't matter. But the strangest thing is, once they vanish, everyone forgets they ever existed. Except for the person they've chosen." "Chosen?" My throat tightened, heart pounding painfully. "Chosen for what?" Richard swallowed hard, eyes grave. "This ship, it's more than metal and glass. It has a life of its own, a hunger, It takes people, absorbs them, erases them from memory. Amelia Carter disappeared 20 years ago, but sometimes the lost try to warn others. They appear briefly, trying desperately to be remembered. His words echoed inside my mind, dread growing deeper. But why me? Because, Richard replied slowly, sadness in his voice. The ship always chooses someone new when it takes another. Amelia appeared to you because you're next. She was warning you, begging you to remember her, to keep her memory alive, because soon it might be your memory erased forever. I stared at Richard, numb with horror, my mind racing to reject his terrifying revelation. Yet deep down, I knew it was true. Amelia's frightened words, her frantic plea, "Please don't forget me," now made chilling sense. She tried to warn me of a fate that awaited me, just as it had claimed her. But why does no one stop it? I demanded, voice trembling with anger and fear. Richard shook his head sadly. No one remembers long enough. The ship's secret remains hidden, and those who glimpse the truth either vanish or remain silent, afraid they'll be next. I've survived this long because I learned to look away, to forget. But you, his eyes filled with sorrow, pity even. You remember too clearly. You can't turn back now. The realization hit me like ice, heavy and suffocating. Amelia's fate was mine, waiting silently in the shadows. My heart ached for her, for myself, and for every lost soul the ship had claimed, forgotten by the world. As Richard rose slowly, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, his whispered words left me cold. "Be careful, Daniel. The ship knows you've discovered its secret. It's watching you now, closer than ever before." I couldn't escape Amelia after that conversation with Richard Holloway. Her presence followed me everywhere, appearing and vanishing just out of reach. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, that exhaustion and paranoia were creating illusions, but soon the sightings became impossible to dismiss. I began seeing Amelia everywhere, her reflection flashing briefly in the polished brass railings, her familiar silhouette lingering at the edge of crowded decks, staring directly at me from the shadows of empty hallways. Yet every time I moved closer, desperate to reach her, she disappeared as suddenly as she'd appeared, leaving only cold air and silence behind. Each encounter became more vivid and unsettling. One evening, I walked down the promenade deck filled with passengers laughing and chatting, the sound strangely distant to me. I turned abruptly, sensing eyes upon me. Amelia stood motionless in the crowd, her expression mournful and pleading. I rushed toward her, pushing past startled passengers, reaching out. But she was gone, replaced only by empty space and bewildered stares from those around me. "Are you all right, sir?" someone asked, but I couldn't reply. How could I explain what was happening? That a woman erased from existence was haunting me, silently begging me for help? The ship itself seemed to grow stranger each passing day. Corridors I had walked hundreds of times now felt different, subtly distorted. Hallways seemed impossibly longer, stretching endlessly into dim, unsettling shadows. Mirrors reflected distorted versions of familiar places, small changes that felt deeply wrong. A clock showing a different time, furniture slightly out of place, walls painted colors that weren't there when I turned to look directly. Reality itself felt fractured aboard the paradise of the seas, and I was falling deeper into this nightmarish confusion. Desperate for answers, or perhaps proof of my sanity, I went to the ship's photography booth, where passengers could view and buy pictures from their voyage. Hundreds of cheerful vacationers smiled from countless snapshots pinned to the display wall. But as I scanned the photos closely, my blood ran cold. In every photograph, hidden in the backgrounds, stood Amelia. She was everywhere, in restaurants, at the swimming pool, behind groups of smiling families. In each image, her gaze was fixed directly on the camera, eyes wide and pleading, face pale and filled with dread. She had been watching all along, silently begging someone, anyone, to notice her before it was too late. Heart racing, I stepped away from the booth, overcome by a mixture of grief and terror. Amelia had tried desperately to warn me, yet I felt helpless to reach her. How could I save someone who had already vanished from existence? That night, sleep brought no peace, only fragmented nightmares. I woke abruptly, gasping for air in the oppressive darkness of my cabin. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. My cabin door stood wide open, the hallway beyond illuminated dimly by flickering lights. I was certain I had locked the door. Heart hammering, I rose slowly from my bed, stepping cautiously forward. Cold air brushed my skin as I reached the door frame. But the hallway was empty, silent except for the distant, soft hum of the ship's engines. Then, behind me, came a faint scratching sound. I spun around, pulse pounding painfully. My eyes widened in shock as my gaze fell on the far wall of my cabin. Deeply etched into the wood paneling, as though carved by frantic, desperate hands, were the words, "Help me." I stumbled backward, breath catching painfully in my chest. Who, or what had been here? My instincts screamed at me to flee, but terror rooted me in place. Suddenly, my radio crackled loudly to life, shattering the silence. Static filled the room at first, then slowly cleared, replaced by a familiar voice, soft, frightened, trembling. "Daniel, Amelia?" I whispered, voice shaking uncontrollably. "Where are you?" Her voice broke with desperation, the sound crackling and distorted as though fighting through layers of interference. "I'm here, trapped. It won't let me go. Find me, please. Find me before it's too late." The radio abruptly fell silent, leaving only static and the violent pounding of my heart in the darkness. The meaning of Amelia's final plea crashed down on me, suffocating in its dread. She wasn't simply lost. She was trapped, somewhere within the dark heart of this ship. And if I didn't find her soon, I would share her fate, erased completely. Steeling myself, I grabbed my flashlight, keys, and radio, stepping into the silent, empty hallway. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to leave this floating nightmare behind, but I knew escape was impossible. Whatever had claimed Amelia, whatever had claimed so many others, would soon claim me, unless I confronted it directly. The corridors felt colder now, shadows deeper, whispering around me as though the ship itself breathed. Amelia's whispered voice echoed endlessly in my mind, urging me onward, guiding my desperate search. I quickly moved through dim corridors and stairways, retracing every step, desperately searching for clues. I remembered Richard Holloway's warning, that the ship was alive, aware, and always watching. But if it was alive, it could be confronted and maybe even stopped. At the farthest reaches of the lowest deck, a section usually off-limits to passengers, I paused at a locked door marked "Maintenance. Authorized crew only." My security keys shook in my hand as I unlocked it and stepped inside. The room beyond was dark and suffocatingly narrow, filled with twisting pipes, machinery, and endless shadows. But as I moved forward, the air thickened further, oppressive and cold, heavy with an overwhelming sense of despair. My flashlight flickered weakly, beam barely cutting through the darkness. Then I heard it, a soft, faint sobbing. Amelia's voice, unmistakable, frightened and lost. I followed the sound urgently, weaving through tangled machinery and pipes, deeper into the oppressive darkness until I found myself facing another door, rusted and nearly forgotten. Behind it, Amelia's voice wept softly, begging quietly for help. Hands trembling, I tried every key I had, desperately attempting to open the rusted lock. Finally, one clicked, and the heavy door creaked open, revealing pitch darkness beyond. "Amelia?" My voice cracked with desperation as I stepped cautiously inside, flashlight barely illuminating the narrow space. But the room was empty, completely empty, and yet her voice still whispered around me, pleading desperately. "Daniel, you're almost here. Please hurry." I turned, panic rising. I was certain she was here, right here, yet the darkness mocked me. Behind me, the rusted door slammed shut with deafening finality, locking me within the dark heart of the ship. Trapped, Amelia's sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold, sinister silence. In that terrible quiet, realization hit me with crushing certainty. The ship had finally claimed me, and like Amelia before me, I too would vanish, forgotten by everyone, unless somehow I found a way to escape the endless, haunting darkness of the paradise of the seas. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I stood trapped behind the heavy door, deep within the forgotten heart of the paradise of the seas. Amelia's voice had faded to silence, leaving me alone in oppressive darkness, cold and unyielding. But deep down, I knew I wasn't truly alone. Something else waited here, hidden, watching my every move. My breathing quickened as I struggled to calm my nerves. With shaking fingers, I tried the door handle again, but it was locked solidly, no way out. Panic surged inside me, but then, just as despair began to take hold, my flashlight beam illuminated something faintly visible on the wall, a faded arrow painted onto rusted metal, pointing downward, leading deeper into the ship. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a final warning. Following the arrow, I moved cautiously downward, through winding passages and narrow staircases that creaked with every hesitant step. The air grew thicker, stale, heavy with the scent of rust and decay, evidence that no one had ventured this deep for many years. Finally, at the lowest point of the ship, far beneath passenger decks, crew quarters, and engine rooms, I reached another door. This one bore faded yellow lettering that read, "Authorized personnel only, storage area B." The lock was old and brittle. With a single determined push, it snapped, and the door creaked slowly open. Inside was an untouched storage room, frozen in time. Wooden crates stacked high, covered in thick dust, rusted metal shelving lined the walls. My flashlight swept slowly around the room, illuminating boxes labeled with long-forgotten supply codes and old, abandoned tools scattered across the floor. But at the far end of the room, something else caught my attention, something impossible to ignore. Covering the entire back wall was a large, makeshift shrine, a wall plastered entirely with photographs. Hundreds of faded, yellowing images were pinned haphazardly, each showing a smiling crew member or passenger. My heart raced as I stepped closer, horrified yet mesmerized by this gallery of the forgotten. Each photograph had a name written below it in faded handwriting, alongside a single, haunting date, the exact day each person had vanished without explanation. My throat tightened painfully, the flashlight trembling violently in my hand as I recognized the faces staring back at me. Faces erased from memory, their stories silenced forever. And at the very center, freshly pinned, was a photo that froze my heart in place. Amelia Carter smiled gently, dressed in her familiar reception uniform. Beneath her face, her date of disappearance was clear, 3 days ago. The exact moment she'd vanished from memory, erased from existence by whatever dark force ruled this ship. A nauseating dread filled me as the awful truth became clear. This was not simply a storage area, it was a record, a monument created by something sinister, collecting souls, capturing their memories like trophies. And now Amelia had joined them. The flashlight flickered suddenly, plunging the room briefly into total darkness. Panic gripped me as I frantically shook the flashlight, desperately coaxing it back to life. But as the beam returned, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The temperature plummeted sharply, the air turning frigid, my breath visible in front of me. Then, from deep within the shadows at the far corner of the room, came a voice, low, guttural, barely human, and impossibly cold. "You shouldn't be here." My heart nearly stopped, breath catching painfully in my throat. Instinctively, I swung the flashlight toward the source, but the shadows resisted the beam, swirling thickly as if alive, coalescing into something unnatural. A figure emerged slowly, stepping out from the darkness itself. It was humanoid, yet entirely inhuman. Shifting, writhing shadows shaping a form that seemed barely able to hold itself together. Its body flickered in and out of existence, as though it belonged neither fully to this world nor another, a creature born from darkness and despair. Too deep, hollow eyes opened within its shifting face, staring into mine with a hunger that chilled me to my bones. What are you?" I whispered hoarsely, voice shaking uncontrollably. The shadow's voice was like ice, echoing softly around the small chamber. I am hunger. I am memory's end. I am the silence that follows when life is forgotten. And now, I know you. It moved forward slowly, gliding effortlessly across the floor. I backed away, heart pounding, panic flooding my chest as I felt trapped between the entity and the horrific wall behind me. The creature paused, tilting its shifting head as if curious. You remember the girl? It hissed softly, shadows twisting around it like dark smoke. She called for you, begged for your help. But memory is dangerous here. Why do you take them? I asked desperately, stalling for time, mind racing to find an escape. Why, Amelia? The creature shuddered violently, its edges rippling, distorted. Because memory is power. The forgotten sustain me. Their absence strengthens me. Amelia fought harder than most, but she lost. They always lose. It moved closer, shadows licking hungrily at the edges of my flashlight's weakening beam. And now, Daniel Reeves, you will join them. Fear flooded through me, but anger rose with it. A fierce determination to fight back. Amelia's desperate plea echoed in my mind. Find me before it's too late. If memory was power, maybe remembrance itself was the key. You're wrong, I said defiantly, voice stronger now. You might erase people, but you can't erase their memory completely. Amelia fought back. She reached out. She isn't forgotten, not by me. The entity recoiled slightly, the darkness around it wavering. I stepped forward boldly, my flashlight held steady, challenging it openly. You fear remembrance, don't you? That's why you erase their existence. Because you're vulnerable to memory. That's why Amelia appeared to me. Because remembering weakens you. The creature hissed angrily, shadows whipping violently around it, its form rippling and unstable. You understand nothing. She is mine, just as you soon will be. But now I felt certainty growing within me, defiance burning brightly despite the darkness surrounding me. No, Amelia resisted you, and now so will I. And everyone you've taken, I'll make sure they're remembered. For a moment, the shadow faltered, shrinking back, distorted and weakened. But then, abruptly, it surged forward, enraged, its shadowy arms extending like black tendrils, grasping hungrily for me. I turned to flee, but the creature's icy grip closed around me instantly, cold fingers digging painfully into my flesh, darkness flooding my vision. The air itself seemed to pull me toward oblivion, toward a silence from which there was no escape. In that terrible moment, as darkness consumed me, I realized Amelia's warning hadn't only been a plea, it was a guide. She had shown me the truth and the path forward. Memory was indeed power, and as long as someone remembered, there was hope. Summoning my last ounce of strength, I cried out one final time, echoing Amelia's words in defiance of the creature. I won't forget. I won't let them forget. And in that instant, as my voice shattered the silence, the entity shrieked in agony, recoiling from the force of memory itself. But whether it was enough to save Amelia, myself, or anyone else trapped aboard the paradise of the seas, I could no longer be certain. The creature's grip tightened around me, ice-cold darkness seeping deep into my bones, pulling me toward oblivion. But I refused to surrender, not while Amelia and the others still waited, trapped and forgotten within the belly of this monstrous vessel. The shadowy entity hissed with frustration, its voice layered with dozens, no, hundreds, of whispers, each one belonging to a lost soul it had claimed. Men, women, crew, passengers, every victim, their desperate voices blended into an agonizing chorus, pleading, crying out for freedom. Why do you fight, Daniel Reeves? The entity snarled, its shifting form contorting violently. They are mine. They belong here, with me. The forgotten fuel my existence. I won't let you keep them, I shouted defiantly, resisting the creature's icy grasp. You've stolen enough lives. The darkness around me pulsed angrily, but the whispers now grew louder, clearer, as if all the trapped souls were awakening, stirred by my defiance. Suddenly, the creature's voice shifted tone, becoming almost desperate, almost pleading. The ship is a prison, it whispered urgently, haunted and mournful. a trap from which no soul escapes. For Amelia to go free, another must remain. That is the rule. That is the price of remembrance. I hesitated, horror flooding me at the implication. The creature sensed my uncertainty, tightening its grip once more. You know it's true, it hissed softly, intimately. To save Amelia Carter, you must take her place. A soul for a soul. Her freedom requires your sacrifice. My breath caught sharply. I knew it spoke truthfully. This endless cycle of suffering and forgetting demanded a terrible payment. Yet, as I remembered Amelia's pleading eyes, her desperate whispers, I felt certainty rise within me. I'd come too far, seemed too much to abandon her now. If breaking this cycle required sacrifice, then I would pay the price. No, I replied fiercely, determination steadying my voice. You're wrong. Amelia didn't choose me, so I could become another forgotten victim. She chose me because she knew I'd stop you. Ignoring the entity's furious shriek, I lunged toward the shrine of photographs, reaching into my pocket for the lighter I always carried on patrol. If memories empowered this thing, then perhaps destroying its trophies, the tangible evidence of its stolen lives, could weaken its hold. Hands trembling, I flicked the lighter on, holding the small flame to the edges of the photographs. Flames erupted instantly, greedily spreading across the wall, consuming the images, the forgotten faces turning to ash. The entity howled in agony, releasing me violently as the entire ship suddenly shook, groaning painfully beneath our feet. Metal screamed and twisted as the flames leaped higher, a roaring blaze of defiance against the darkness. Through the flames and choking smoke, I glimpsed her one last time. Amelia standing just beyond the burning wall, clearer and more solid than ever before. Her face, once filled with fear, was now peaceful, gentle, bathed in a strange, ethereal light. She stepped toward me, reaching out her hand through the swirling smoke. Her voice echoed gently in my mind, warm and filled with gratitude. Thank you, Daniel. You remembered when everyone else forgot. As her hand briefly touched mine, warmth flooded my body, driving away the cold left by the entity's touch. For a single, beautiful moment, I saw her clearly, smiling warmly, no longer trapped or afraid. Then she faded, her spirit freed from the ship's dark grasp. Amelia, I called desperately, but her figure dissolved gently, leaving behind only a whisper of warmth. Suddenly, the creature surged forward again, weaker but enraged. You've taken my prize. It snarled furiously, its form fractured, unraveling into wisps of shadow. But the price remains. I demand my sacrifice. Behind it, the flames intensified, devouring the last traces of the forgotten faces, destroying the source of the entity's strength. But I knew the creature wouldn't stop. It would never stop, unless its hunger was fulfilled. A chilling calm filled me. Amelia was free, finally at peace. But the ship still needed one final soul to end the cycle. I stared into the creature's distorted, hateful eyes, accepting the truth at last. My freedom or hers. Only one of us could walk away. I had already made my choice. If it's a sacrifice you need, I whispered fiercely, stepping toward the creature. Then take me, but she goes free. You'll never erase her again. The shadows surged forward greedily, wrapping around me tightly, the icy chill returning, pulling me downward into darkness. My vision blurred, consciousness fading rapidly, the weight of forgotten lives pressing down upon me. Yet, even as darkness overwhelmed my senses, I felt no regret. Amelia was free, released from her prison aboard the paradise of the seas, finally remembered and restored. My sacrifice had meaning, purpose beyond my own life. The darkness engulfed me completely, silence descending around me. But just before oblivion claimed me, Amelia's gentle voice whispered softly in the darkness, filled with both sadness and gratitude. You won't be forgotten either, Daniel. I'll remember you, always. As her words faded, I understood clearly that I hadn't lost. The entity's power came from erasure, from the forgotten, but Amelia would carry my memory with her, freeing us both from eternal silence. The creature's cycle had finally broken, weakened by remembrance itself. The ship would continue sailing, its dark hunger diminished, weakened, perhaps even temporarily defeated. And though I was gone, Amelia would tell my story, keeping my memory alive, ensuring the darkness could never fully claim victory again. In the end, memory itself had won, stronger than silence, stronger than darkness. Amelia was free, and though I'd paid the highest price, I had finally fulfilled the promise I'd made when I first read her desperate plea. Please, don't forget me. Bright sunlight poured across the decks as the paradise of the seas docked gently at its final destination in Miami. Passengers laughed, chatted, and eagerly lined up at the gangway, blissfully unaware of the nightmarish events hidden beneath the ship's gleaming surface. To them, the voyage had been nothing but relaxation and joy. No darkness, no disappearances, no desperate pleas etched into cabin walls. Yet, as I moved slowly through the crowd, I felt isolated, disconnected from this cheerful reality. My head throbbed softly, and my memories were already beginning to blur, fragments of the horror slipping away like sand through my fingers. I stopped at the reception desk one last time, needing to anchor myself, to confirm one undeniable truth before I stepped ashore. Claire stood behind the counter, calm and professional, smiling politely as I approached. "Claire," I said softly, hesitation filling my voice, "do you remember Amelia?" She paused, brow creasing slightly in confusion. "Amelia?" she echoed, puzzled. "Who's Amelia?" A pang of sadness passed through me, though I wasn't entirely sure why. "Never mind," I murmured quietly, stepping away, confusion creeping further into my thoughts. Had I imagined it all? Had the horrors of the night even been real, or had exhaustion twisted reality into something unrecognizable? Leaving the ship behind, I stepped onto the dock, feeling oddly lighter with every step away from the towering vessel. Passengers laughed around me, reunited with loved ones, eager to share stories of their vacation. But for me, there was only a strange emptiness, a sense of loss I couldn't quite understand. As I walked further down the pier, lost in thought, I glanced briefly at my reflection in a nearby window. My breath caught sharply as, for a fleeting moment, I saw her standing just behind me. Amelia, her face calm, eyes filled with a quiet, bittersweet sadness. She offered a gentle smile, a silent farewell, her image lingering briefly before fading like mist in sunlight. My heart raced painfully, grief surging powerfully through me. But then the ship's horn blared loudly behind me, echoing across the harbor, shattering my thoughts. Startled, I turned quickly toward the ship, huge, beautiful, glistening in the morning sun. In that instant, memories faded swiftly, slipping gently away. I turned again toward my reflection, confused, searching the empty space behind me. Nothing. No one there. A strange chill moved softly through my chest, yet I couldn't explain why. I struggled for clarity, but my mind grew hazy, clouded, uncertain. A single question lingered uneasily in the back of my mind. Was there ever someone named Amelia? The thought faded quickly, leaving only the slightest echo of sadness, soon lost among the laughter and bright sunlight of Miami's harbor. As I walked away, a lingering feeling of something important remained just beyond my grasp, something forgotten, something lost. But whatever it was gone now, swallowed by silence, leaving me only with the faint, uneasy sensation of eyes watching me from somewhere deep within the paradise of the seas, patiently waiting to remember once again. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm 27 years old and make my living as a travel photographer. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated by the open road, the thrill of heading out into the unknown, capturing fleeting moments through the lens of my camera. This passion eventually became my career, allowing me to explore places most people only see in photographs. My girlfriend, Lisa Carter, shares my enthusiasm for adventure. She's 25, a freelance writer whose curiosity matches my own. Together, we decided to embark on a cross-country road trip, seeking fresh inspiration and stories that would last a lifetime. It was a dream we'd both harbored for years, and finally, it was becoming our reality. We left early one morning, watching the sunrise from the rearview mirror of our packed-up silver SUV. The city lights faded into memory as endless highways stretched before us. Our route was simple enough, from coast to coast, exploring places that felt forgotten by time. Neither of us wanted a strict itinerary. Instead, we preferred following wherever the roads and our instincts might lead. For days, everything was perfect. Blue skies, picturesque towns, and long, scenic roads that promised endless freedom. We stayed in quirky motels, ate at roadside diners, and laughed over terrible radio stations playing songs from decades ago. It felt like life couldn't possibly get any better. I spent the days capturing breathtaking photographs, while Lisa scribbled notes for stories she planned to write later. On the fourth day of our trip, the landscape began to change. We entered a vast, desolate region where towns became scarce and miles stretched emptily ahead. The greenery and charming architecture gave way to endless fields of dried grass, scattered rocks, and twisted, lifeless trees. The highway narrowed, becoming just 2 lanes winding through a harsh, lonely terrain. As hours passed, excitement began fading into an odd sense of isolation. The road seemed to lead nowhere, the same landscape repeating itself again and again. We hadn't passed another vehicle or sign of human life for nearly an hour. I glanced over at Lisa, noticing a quiet look had settled into her eyes. She smiled softly, squeezing my hand reassuringly, yet something in her expression mirrored my own growing unease. The sky shifted slowly toward dusk, bathing everything in shades of orange and purple, shadows stretching long across the empty pavement. The radio began losing signal, crackling between static and distant murmurs of half-audible voices. Lisa reached over and switched it off. "Maybe we're a bit off the beaten path," she joked, trying to break the tension that was growing thicker with every mile. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a casual smile. "Feels like we're the last people on Earth out here." She laughed lightly, but the sound faded quickly, replaced by silence. That's when I glanced into the side mirror and saw it, a deep blue sedan behind us. I wasn't sure how long it had been there, but now it sat about 100 yards back, matching our speed precisely. "That's weird," I murmured, twisting around to get a better look out the back window. Lisa glanced at me, puzzled. "What's up?" she asked, eyes still fixed ahead on the road. "There's a car behind us." I didn't even notice it approach. Lisa quickly checked her mirror, frowning slightly. Me neither. Probably just someone else traveling through." I nodded, but something felt off. The sedan didn't accelerate to pass, nor did it fall back. Instead, it maintained that careful distance, as though purposefully pacing itself. I tried not to let paranoia get the better of me, reminding myself we were just 2 travelers on the same remote road. Still, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling starting to take root deep inside. Minutes turned slowly into an hour, and still, the blue sedan remained precisely behind us. Lisa grew quieter, and even the sunset felt eerie now, casting strange shadows across the barren landscape. It was as if the world itself was turning cold around us. "Are they seriously following us?" Lisa finally whispered, her voice hesitant and strained. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my gaze fixed intently on the reflection of the car in the mirror. It was impossible to see the driver clearly, only a vague silhouette visible behind tinted windows. "Maybe they're just heading the same direction," I said, trying to reassure both Lisa and myself. But even I didn't fully believe it anymore. Darkness fell quickly, and our headlights cut through the night, revealing a road that seemed endless. The isolation we'd initially embraced now felt unsettling, almost threatening. Lisa shivered visibly, gripping the wheel tighter. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice now edged with anxiety. "I don't like this." As much as I tried to stay calm, I felt the same dread creeping in. We were alone, miles from any civilization, with nothing but the sound of tires humming softly on the asphalt and a mysterious car tracking every move we made. "Just keep driving," I told her, trying to mask my own rising fear. Eventually, they'll turn off. But in my heart, I wondered if that was really true. Hours dragged on, each minute feeling longer than the last. Lisa's earlier laughter had dissolved into tense silence, broken only by occasional glances into the rearview mirror. My neck ached from constantly turning back, unable to shake the feeling of being closely watched. The deep blue sedan had become a relentless shadow. No matter how we sped up or slowed down, it mimicked every move, keeping its distance precisely, like a predator patiently stalking its prey. Finally, I leaned toward Lisa and whispered, "Switch lanes suddenly." "What?" Her voice trembled slightly, and she glanced at me, eyes wide with uncertainty. "Just try it," I said softly. "Let's see if it's coincidence or deliberate." Without hesitating further, Lisa abruptly switched lanes. My heart sank as the headlights behind us moved fluidly, precisely copying our maneuver. Lisa's breath caught audibly. I felt my pulse quicken. "Maybe it's just some weird prank," Lisa tried to joke nervously. "Or maybe it's a ghost car." She forced a weak laugh, but her hands clenched the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. Even in the semi-darkness, I noticed a sheen of sweat forming along her forehead. "Slow down slightly," I said, suddenly remembering the camera lying beside me. My hands shook as I grabbed it, heart thumping in my chest. Maybe if I could get a clear look at the driver, it would put our fears to rest. Lisa eased her foot gently off the accelerator. Predictably, the blue car adjusted its pace accordingly. Taking a deep breath, I raised my camera, zooming in carefully through the rear window. The sedan's dark-tinted windows made it challenging to see anything at first. But as the camera's autofocus sharpened, my blood turned to ice. The driver's seat was empty. I blinked hard, convinced I must have made a mistake. My pulse roared in my ears. I adjusted the focus again, desperation guiding my movements. But the reality was undeniable. There was nobody driving that car. "Mark? What is it?" Lisa's voice trembled, sensing my fear without even seeing what I had discovered. "Nothing," I lied, lowering my camera quickly, hoping to mask my panic. I just can't make out who's driving." But my voice betrayed me, shaky and uncertain. Lisa shot me a terrified glance, fully aware that something was horribly wrong. Lisa pressed her foot down on the accelerator, pushing our SUV faster along the darkened highway. Trees whipped past in shadowy blurs, and our headlights struggled to illuminate the endless asphalt ahead. Yet no matter how much speed we gained, the blue sedan effortlessly kept pace. Suddenly, the sedan's headlights flickered strangely, shifting unpredictably between dim and unnaturally bright, as if signaling something we couldn't understand. My breath caught in my throat, and Lisa gripped the wheel even tighter. "Mark, what's happening?" she asked, voice rising with a hint of panic. Before I could reply, the car's radio abruptly crackled to life, its volume rising on its own, drowning out Lisa's frightened breathing. Static filled the cabin, sharp and unsettling. Then, hidden within the noise, a faint, distorted whisper emerged, echoing eerily inside our vehicle. "Why did you leave me?" A chill surged down my spine. Lisa reached for the controls, quickly turning off the radio, but within moments, it clicked itself back on. The voice returned clearer, more desperate this time. "Why did you leave me?" "Mark." I felt my heart stop. My breathing became ragged, my mouth painfully dry. Lisa shot me a terrified glance, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "Mark," she cried, "what's going on?" "I don't know," I shouted over the chilling static, panic seizing me completely. "Just keep driving." Desperate to escape, Lisa veered suddenly off the highway onto an unexpected exit ramp, the tires screeching against the pavement. A sign blurred past us, unreadable in the darkness, and suddenly we found ourselves on a winding, narrow road lined by dense forest. Branches loomed overhead, casting dark shadows in front of our headlights. For the first time, I looked behind us and saw nothing but emptiness. The sedan was gone. Lisa exhaled sharply, slowing slightly. Her voice shook with cautious relief. Did we lose it?" I stared into the mirror, heart hammering violently. I think so. But even as the words left my lips, headlights flared suddenly behind us, closer now, unnaturally close, as if it had materialized from thin air. My entire body stiffened. "Lisa, it's back!" Lisa screamed as the blue car sped closer, inches now separating our vehicles. Reacting instinctively, she swerved violently off the winding road onto a gravel path, tires crunching loudly beneath us. Dust billowed around the car as we slid dangerously into a deserted gas station's empty parking lot, skidding to a halt beneath a flickering, broken streetlight. Breathing heavily, Lisa stared straight ahead, hands trembling uncontrollably on the steering wheel. My eyes remained locked onto the road, waiting for the inevitable. Seconds stretched painfully, yet the blue sedan never appeared around the bend. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, it emerged slowly from the shadows at the edge of the forest, idling ominously, headlights fixed directly toward us like malevolent eyes. My breath caught, waiting for something awful, but the car simply lingered a moment, then quietly turned off its headlights, melting slowly back into the darkness until it vanished entirely. Lisa sobbed softly, tears running freely down her face as she collapsed forward against the wheel. I sat frozen, staring into the empty night where the blue sedan had vanished. Silence enveloped us again, broken only by Lisa's quiet cries and my rapid, fearful breathing. Whatever had chased us was gone, for now, but deep down, we both understood it wasn't over yet. The deserted gas station felt ominous in the darkness, and neither of us wanted to linger there. After regaining our composure, we drove cautiously, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. No headlights followed this time, yet the unease still clung to us like a shadow. Eventually, faint lights appeared ahead, signaling civilization at last. It was just a tiny roadside motel, a collection of cabins with flickering neon signs, but it felt like a haven. Pulling into the gravel driveway, our headlights illuminated an old wooden sign. Sleepy Pines Motel, vacancy. The sign creaked slightly in the wind, giving the motel a quiet sense of decay. But exhaustion and fear trumped our apprehension, and we quickly parked and hurried toward the reception cabin. Inside, an elderly man stood behind a cluttered desk. His eyes were weary but kind, framed by deep lines carved by age. He gave us a welcoming smile, but it faded quickly when he saw our faces clearly beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. "You folks okay?" His voice carried genuine concern, his eyes moving slowly between me and Lisa. I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal, but Lisa stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. We had a strange experience on the road," she said softly. "A car was following us. A deep blue sedan. It was acting strangely." The old man's expression instantly shifted, his gentle warmth replaced by something else, fear. His face paled noticeably, and he looked down, avoiding our gaze. "Did you say a blue sedan?" His voice dropped to a whisper, strained with urgency. "Yes," Lisa replied cautiously, her tone matching his unease. "Why? Do you know something about it?" He shook his head stiffly, refusing to look up. "No, I can't talk about it." "Please," I pressed, desperation clear in my voice. "If you know anything." But he raised a trembling hand, stopping my words mid-sentence. "Look, you folks better just get some rest. Don't speak about it, especially not here. Some things are best forgotten." He quickly handed us a key, his eyes filled with a haunted sadness. Without another word, he turned away, disappearing into a back room, leaving Lisa and me alone in the oppressive silence. In our small room, we sat on the bed in exhausted silence. Lisa stared absently at the faded floral wallpaper, her face pale and thoughtful. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Mark, I think I've seen that car before." I turned sharply toward her, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "When?" She shook her head slowly, eyes still distant as if lost in a memory. "It was a long time ago. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. I'd forgotten until tonight, but I remember rain hitting a windshield. It was pouring hard, everything blurry and dark. I was scared. My mother was with me. She leaned over and whispered to me clearly, "Close your eyes, sweetheart. Don't look." Lisa paused, breathing shakily. And I did. I closed my eyes and listened. There were noises, loud screeching tires, the sound of metal crunching. After that, nothing. It's all blank. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me. "Mark, I think it was the same blue sedan." A chill washed over me. I wrapped an arm tightly around Lisa, pulling her close as she quietly sobbed into my shoulder. What had seemed simply strange now felt deeply personal and far more sinister. Unable to sleep, I pulled out my laptop, determined to uncover something, anything, that could explain what had happened to us. Lisa lay quietly beside me, her breathing soft and steady, but I knew she was awake, trapped in memories. I searched online, entering phrases like blue car accident, missing persons, and the name of this isolated highway. Results filled the screen, mostly irrelevant at first, minor accidents and local gossip from towns miles away. Frustration mounted as hours passed without answers. But just as fatigue nearly forced my eyes shut, a small, blurry news clipping caught my attention. Mother dies in fiery crash on rural highway. Daughter still missing. Heart pounding, I clicked the article open. It was a news archive dated 15 years earlier. My blood ran cold as I skimmed through the text. A tragic accident claimed the life of Elizabeth Carter last night on a rural stretch of highway. Witnesses say Carter, driving a dark blue sedan, lost control during heavy rain, causing the vehicle to crash violently and burst into flames. Carter's body was recovered from the wreckage, but authorities remain puzzled as to the whereabouts of her young daughter, Lisa Carter, age 6, who is presumed missing. No trace of Lisa has been found, and the search is ongoing. My breath froze, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. I read the words repeatedly, trying to make sense of something impossible. The room spun around me, reality blurring as the article's facts settled deep into my consciousness. "Lisa," my voice barely managed a whisper. "Did you know about this?" She sat upright slowly, her eyes wide and wet with tears. "Know about what?" Unable to speak, I turned the laptop toward her, watching her face closely as she read the article. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, finally settling into disbelief. "No," she whispered faintly, hands covering her mouth in horror. "This can't be real." The truth hovered unspoken between us, terrifying and undeniable. Lisa Carter, the woman sitting beside me, had officially vanished 15 years earlier. Yet here she was, alive and beside me, her past colliding violently with the present. A strange sensation filled the room, heavy and suffocating. For the first time, the eerie whisper we'd heard on the radio echoed in my mind with chilling clarity. "Why did you leave me?" Neither of us slept that night, haunted by questions too frightening to ask aloud. Who had really been following us on that dark highway? What did the voice want? And more importantly, what really happened 15 years ago to Lisa Carter, the little girl who shouldn't even be alive? We didn't wait until sunrise. The motel had become suffocating, haunted by the oppressive silence and dark revelations of the night. Neither Lisa nor I spoke much as we hastily packed our belongings and slipped silently past the still dark reception desk. As our car rolled over the gravel toward the empty highway, a sickening feeling twisted inside me. Something felt profoundly wrong. Lisa sat beside me, pale and silent, staring blankly into the dark morning. The horizon was just beginning to glow softly with the first hints of sunrise, but rather than hopeful, it seemed to mock us, reminding us of the horrors still fresh in our minds. Minutes later, we merged onto the desolate stretch of highway, trying desperately to outrun what we discovered. For a fleeting moment, the road felt almost peaceful, empty of all but our vehicle, speeding toward the sunrise. But my relief was short-lived. A sudden, familiar flash of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Before I could even react, the blue sedan slid up beside us. This time, not lurking behind, but matching our speed precisely alongside. Lisa froze, staring in horror at the vehicle next to us. Its windows, previously dark, now shone with an eerie, faint bluish glow, revealing an interior that appeared empty and impossibly dark. Yet it moved effortlessly, inch for inch, keeping pace with us, like some sinister reflection. "What is it doing?" Lisa whispered desperately, her voice tight with fear. "I don't know," I replied breathlessly, gripping the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I risked a quick glance at the sedan, and my blood turned to ice. Despite having seen the empty seat earlier, a shadowy figure now sat behind the wheel, obscured yet clearly visible, silent, unmoving, its face hidden by shadows. Heart pounding, I forced my attention back to the road, but I could feel the other car's relentless presence pressing closer. Lisa whimpered softly, her hand clutching mine. "Mark, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life on its own, static filling the cabin before resolving into a clear, haunting whisper. "Lisa, baby, you left me." Lisa gasped sharply, her eyes wide with panic. "Mom." Before I could respond, the figure beside us shifted slowly, revealing itself fully. Even through tinted windows, her face became horribly visible, an ethereal apparition, familiar yet impossibly distorted by sorrow and flame. Her eyes were dark hollows, her face pale, marked by ghostly burns that shimmered like fading embers. It was Lisa's mother. Lisa screamed, a piercing cry filled with anguish as memories crashed violently into her consciousness, fragments flooding back, rain pounding against glass, the screech of tires, blinding headlights, flames dancing around twisted metal. "Lisa, what's wrong?" I shouted desperately, swerving instinctively away from the sedan. My pulse thundered in my ears as the road itself seemed to shift beneath us, distorting in ways reality shouldn't allow. I remember now. Lisa sobbed, trembling uncontrollably. "I was there. I survived, but my mother, she didn't." The sedan pressed closer, the figure turning its head slowly to face Lisa directly through tinted glass. Even without seeing clearly, I could sense an overwhelming sorrow emanating from the phantom behind the wheel. Its presence felt inescapable, as if bound to Lisa's very existence. "You left me alone," the voice murmured again, heartbreakingly clear, filling every corner of the car. Tears streamed down Lisa's face, her voice breaking with guilt and confusion. "I didn't mean to. I was just a child. I didn't know." The world suddenly felt like it was collapsing around us, reality bending at its edges. The highway seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, repeating endlessly, an impossible loop trapping us in this nightmarish confrontation. Mile markers passed again and again, identical and disorienting, mocking our attempts to escape. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted in panic, swerving violently to avoid the phantom sedan, but it effortlessly mirrored my every move. The world blurred around us, colors and shapes blending together in a dizzying spiral. I fought to maintain control as reality itself seemed to warp, folding and looping endlessly, trapping us on a road that no longer obeyed natural laws. I accelerated desperately, the engine roaring furiously beneath us. But still, we remained locked side by side with the spectral blue sedan, the figure at the wheel turning slowly to fix an empty, haunted gaze directly at me. A sudden rush of freezing air filled our car, seizing my lungs painfully. Lisa reached out, clutching my arm desperately. "Mark," she screamed, eyes wide and pleading. "Don't let her take me back." Time seemed to slow. The whisper returned, unbearably clear, now tinged with deep sadness. "Come back to me, Lisa. Come home." But instead of soothing Lisa, the voice seemed to intensify her fear. Her sobbing filled the cabin, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. The road itself seemed to distort before my eyes, looping endlessly, trapping us both physically and emotionally within Lisa's unresolved past. Desperation overcame rational thought. In a final, panicked move, I slammed on the brakes, hoping somehow to break the endless loop. Tires screamed, smoke rising violently from the asphalt, but the sedan halted alongside us, eerily matching our motion with impossible precision. In that terrifying moment, Lisa turned to face the phantom directly, eyes streaming with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," she sobbed, pleading with the ghostly form. "I never meant to leave you, but you have to let me go." The shadowy figure flickered slightly, like an old movie projection distorted by time, the face twisting painfully in sorrowful recognition. Yet the voice persisted, gentle but tormented. "You should have stayed with me. I was so alone." Lisa shook violently, buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the phantom reached toward her, a spectral hand pressing slowly through the sedan's closed window, transparent yet impossibly real. I screamed, reaching protectively toward Lisa, but a powerful force held me paralyzed, helpless to intervene. "I just want peace," the voice whispered softly, heartbreakingly close. "Lisa, come back to me." Suddenly, with an explosive jolt, reality snapped violently back into place. The looping highway vanished abruptly, replaced once again by the familiar, ordinary road stretching ahead. Early morning sunlight spilled across our car's windshield, illuminating a normal stretch of pavement, empty and peaceful. The blue sedan was gone. Lisa slowly raised her head, still trembling. We sat in stunned silence, neither daring to speak or move, questioning our sanity and our reality. But even in the silence that followed, one truth was now painfully clear. Whatever had confronted us on the highway was far more than just a ghost. It was a past Lisa had somehow forgotten, demanding resolution. And until it was faced fully, I knew, deep in my bones, the blue car would return again. Lisa took a deep, shaking breath, her eyes fixed firmly ahead as we raced down the endless highway. Dawn had broken completely, bathing the empty road in pale, golden light, yet the dread from the night lingered thickly in the air. Neither of us dared speak, fearful that words might summon the phantom back into existence. But deep down, we both knew this couldn't continue. The past demanded to be confronted. As if sensing our thoughts, a sudden chill seeped through the car, frosting the windows and causing my breath to come out in visible puffs. The dashboard lights flickered wildly, and before either of us could react, the radio crackled alive again, hissing with painful static. A familiar whisper pierced the silence once more, filled with an aching sorrow that seemed endless. "Lisa, why did you leave me?" Lisa stiffened visibly, her jaw tightening as tears welled in her eyes. She took a deep breath, shaking as she turned to look straight ahead, her voice trembling yet defiant. "I know you're hurting," she whispered, each word taking immense effort. "But you have to let me go. It wasn't my fault." At her words, headlights erupted behind us, glaring, furious beams flooding the interior. The blue sedan barreled forward, roaring alongside once again, matching our speed as if challenging Lisa's resolve. It swerved closer, barely inches separating our vehicles. Through the window, Lisa stared directly at the apparition behind the wheel, forcing herself to face the shadow of her mother. The phantom's voice filled the car again, desperate and anguished. "Lisa, baby, come back. I need you." Lisa's voice rose, stronger now, confronting years of buried grief and guilt. "Mom, I survived. I lived. You have to accept that and let me go." The blue sedan lurched violently, headlights pulsing erratically, brightening and dimming like a heartbeat on the verge of breaking. The figure in the driver's seat blurred, flickered, and twisted, caught between anguish and understanding. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, keeping us steady despite the overwhelming fear surging through me. Lisa pressed closer, her voice rising powerfully above the wind roaring outside. "You have to let me go, Mom. You're keeping us both trapped. It's time to rest." A terrible cry echoed from the radio, heartbreaking yet somehow freeing. The phantom figure writhed, struggling as if fighting against unseen chains, the vehicle swerving violently beside us. Yet Lisa refused to look away, confronting her mother's sorrow head-on, daring her to finally release them both. Suddenly, Lisa's voice softened to a whisper, resonating with a quiet strength. "I forgive you, Mom. Please forgive me too." Her mother's distorted form became clearer, less tormented, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the face of a woman finally accepting the truth. Her expression softened with relief, a single tear shimmering down her pale cheek. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," the voice whispered gently, echoing Lisa's long-forgotten memory. "Don't look." Lisa nodded slowly, surrendering fully to trust. She closed her eyes tightly, tears streaming silently down her face, breathing deeply as her body visibly relaxed. Instantly, the chaos around us ceased. The roaring wind faded, replaced by gentle stillness. My heart hammered wildly in my chest, yet peace gradually filled our car. When Lisa opened her eyes again, the blue sedan had vanished completely, replaced only by empty highway and gentle morning sunlight spilling warmly through the windshield. The radio clicked softly off by itself, the oppressive static gone for good. Lisa leaned back heavily against the seat, exhausted yet calm, breathing deeply as if waking from a nightmare. "Is it over?" she finally whispered, turning to look at me. I nodded slowly, cautious yet hopeful. "I think so." For the first time in days, the air felt clear, normal, and real. We drove quietly along the deserted road, each mile gradually distancing us from the horror we'd experienced. Lisa remained quiet, thoughtful, finally confronting the memories she'd repressed for so many years. Eventually, she broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "My mother was stuck, Mark, caught between life and death. All this time, she thought she needed me to join her. She didn't realize she had trapped herself." I reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "She finally heard you, Lisa. You set her free." A faint smile crossed her lips, and she exhaled softly, relief visible in every movement. We set each other free. The endless highway finally began showing signs of civilization again. Towns appeared on the horizon, warm and inviting beneath clear skies. We passed cars filled with ordinary travelers, oblivious to the surreal nightmare we'd narrowly escaped. As the miles rolled peacefully beneath us, I knew we'd carry these memories forever. The ghostly encounter had shaken both of us, changing something fundamental within, but it also gave Lisa the chance to heal wounds that had haunted her since childhood. The blue car was gone, its presence finally extinguished, a phantom no longer. Yet deep down, we both understood its lesson clearly. Sometimes, the past doesn't just vanish. It must be confronted, forgiven, and accepted. Only then can we truly be free. We finally reached our original destination, a small coastal town we'd planned to visit before our lives spiraled into chaos. But nothing felt the same. The quaint beauty of seaside cottages and the rhythmic crashing of ocean waves now felt strangely distant, almost unreal. Lisa walked silently beside me, her expression thoughtful but distant, as if something crucial had been pulled from deep within her. Life returned slowly to normal, yet neither of us felt whole. Lisa described it as an emptiness, a hollow ache, as if a vital piece of her identity had vanished along with her mother's ghost. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out into nothingness, haunted by thoughts she didn't dare share. I wasn't untouched, either. A once carefree traveler, now I was gripped by anxiety whenever confronted with long, empty stretches of highway. The thought of driving through isolated places terrified me, and my camera, a symbol of freedom and exploration, became just a bitter reminder of that nightmare we'd barely escaped. Weeks passed, blending into quiet, cautious routines. But one evening, everything changed again. Lisa stood frozen at our kitchen table, eyes wide with confusion and fear. A folded newspaper lay innocently on the surface, yellowed slightly with age, though neither of us had placed it there. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the paper, breath catching sharply in her throat. It was the article, the same tragic account of her mother's accident. Yet, the date was different. Instead of being from 15 years earlier, it showed today's date. "Mark," she whispered, voice shaking uncontrollably, "this can't be." I stepped closer, heart pounding, as my eyes drifted to the photograph accompanying the article. It was familiar, the twisted wreckage, the burning sedan, but something else had changed. Just beyond the accident, barely noticeable, sat the unmistakable outline of a dark blue car parked quietly at the edge of the scene. My stomach twisted violently when Lisa pointed a trembling finger at the image. "That's outside our house." Lisa leaned closer to examine the photo, her face pale with disbelief. In the darkened reflection of the glass covering the newspaper frame, her mirrored image stared back, yet it was different somehow. It was smiling. Lisa gasped sharply, pulling back as if burned, heart racing wildly. "I wasn't smiling," she whispered breathlessly, eyes wide with horror. "Mark, that's not me." Before I could respond, a familiar, faint hum drifted through the open kitchen window, low and unmistakable, the sound of an engine quietly idling. My blood ran cold, paralyzing fear rooting us both to the spot. Together, we turned slowly toward the window. Outside, bathed softly by the glow of a single street lamp, sat the blue sedan, waiting patiently. As Lisa reached desperately for my hand, the car's headlights flickered gently to life, illuminating us through the thin curtain. The radio on our kitchen counter crackled softly, filled, once again, with gentle static. Then came the whisper, hauntingly familiar. "Lisa, it's time to come home." And so, dear listeners, we reach the end, or perhaps just another beginning. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the shadows, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which story haunted you the most. But before you go, remember, the dark is never truly empty.